while I could tell you about the deal and how great it was a grind to get there. And I think, going back to that excellence, creating opportunities, it's like to get excellent, you have to be willing to do the stuff that nobody else wants to do. Because if I don't know how to do that, if I'm not willing to learn even anything about it, I don't understand the full picture. And I'm really grateful that I had that full cycle background. It makes me better at what I do today.
Welcome to the She's So Sweet podcast, where we interview accomplished women who have worked their way to the C-suite. I'm your host, Kristi Faltorusso, Chief Customer Officer and award-winning customer success executive. I am really, really honored to introduce today's guest. I've got Amy Volas, who is the founder and CEO at Avenue Talent Partners. Amy, welcome to our show today.
Kristi, thank you for having me. This has been a work in progress of behind the scenes, just good juju, and we are finally here, and I'm so excited. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And I'm so excited to amplify your story. I mean, you know this because I've been a fangirl of yours for so long and following. And so when we finally became friends, it was like this moment of like, amazing. Just having you in my circle is like, you give so much back to so many, but to me personally. So I'm so grateful that we get to give you back to our listeners today.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And you know what I forgot? I forgot my Windex bottle. Darn it.
Oh my God. You know what? Shame. Imagine we both had our Windex though. Like I wish we could Photoshop that in there. I'm not.
You know what I haven't said though? And it makes Windex a little bit more fun, I think. So I just had a milestone birthday. I have a Magnum bottle of champagne. Like we could have
like literally like a life size. Like that is like, I mean, that might be the biggest bottle I've actually ever seen.
I mean, you work out. So like that thing, like I just did.
I would just lift it every day just to get like a little bit of my shoulder workout.
So I'm swapping Windex for champagne today, apparently. And
listen, I mean, I don't think that's a horrible swap. I think that's actually like, if I was going to swap it with anything, I think that is a strong runner up.
Full disclosure, I've not consumed any of the champagne, so I am of sober mindset of this conversation. So there is that. But yes, Windex / champagne. Here we go. I'm suited. Okay. Let's do this.
I love that so much for us. So listen, before we get started, I'd love it if you could just tell people a little bit about what you do. Tell us about Avenue Talent Partners. Tell us about your role there. So anything you could share just to give us a foundation on who Amy is.
So, I am a person that is fascinated by the human condition, as it were, and business. And what I realize is the thing that makes humans connected and then the things that disconnects humans is one thing, and that's called communication. And I realized I had a really successful sales career leading up to this. I realized that sales and hiring weren't dissimilar. So Avenue Talent Partners is an executive search firm that helps founders and CEOs hire their sales and CS executives. And when we're not doing that, we have a consultancy to help them bridge their hiring gaps through how they think about the process, how they're showing up in the process, what's not happening in the process, and all the things around that to make that better. So it's interesting because the one word is communication. And it's fascinating I started my company, in 2015. So we're going into 10 years. It's fascinating to me to see the patterns and themes that are rooted in this communication thing. And so I really care deeply about helping people better communicate to make really big decisions for the trajectory of your company, big decisions for the trajectory of your career. And when those decisions are made rooted in really effective communication, good things happen. And when they're not, those are the turnover rates that we get to see and deal with. So that is my jam. That is what we do. I care deeply about leaving the space better than when I came into it. And for those of us that are in and around anything to do with hiring or even in our own careers, especially go to market, it is gnarly that the turnover rates are almost 3 times more than any other kind of role. And instead of just talking about it and not liking it, I decided to do something about it to fix it. So that's me. That's my jam. That's what I'm here to do. And never a dull moment.
I love that so much. So I got to ask a question though, because I know that you see all the stats here. What is the average tenure for folks in these roles?
For executive sales and CS leaders, less than 2 years. And so Carta, I do a lot of work within tech and tech startups. And I appreciate having data to back up what I see. They published a report last year that said, if you are a tech company, and it was sub 10 million, you are likely to turn over every single person in your company within 2 years. And the biggest offenders were sales and marketing.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, those are big stats.
Really big. I mean, to the point where it is ingrained in my brain and I can speak to it like it's my own data. From my own data, I see more like between 16 to 18 months for these roles.
Yep.
So yeah, it's a bummer.
I mean, I don't have the data, but I have my LinkedIn feed, and I can definitely say with confidence that's what it feels like based off of what I see.
It's a thing, and it's not just, I mean, I think it's so easy. I feel like people do this where it's pointing the finger. And one of the things, whether I'm talking to somebody on the talent side or I'm talking to somebody that is desperately trying to figure out how to recover from the hire that didn't work out, the only way to make it better is to really take a real hard look in the mirror and understand you're part of it. What did you learn? What didn't go well? And then on the flip side, these are decisions between two consenting adults. Nobody did this to you, right? You decided, you were excited. And most people that I find on either side of the coin had a little baby whisper of a voice somewhere deep down inside their soul that was like, maybe not. And then all the other rhetoric of, well, if I question that, if I dig into that, it's going to be a pain in the neck. It's going to add an extra step. I'm going to lose the person. It's this fear of loss. And then this double down on, I need to sell you on me, or I need to sell you on this opportunity. And I think about it very, very differently than I think the majority of the people that I meet, talk to, have experienced myself when it comes to this. And in my opinion, and what I've proven over the last 10 years, is that's where it starts and stops. And so that's my whole thing. Like, that's how I think about it. That's where I spend my time. That's where I see improvements. That's where my process is rooted. And so, yeah, it's every search is completely different. And it's fascinating to see that while every search is completely different, the pitfalls on both sides of the coin tend to be quite similar.
Oh, it's scary. Well, for anybody who's listening who's not following Amy, if any of this interests you, go follow her on LinkedIn if you're not already, because I love, love, love and live for the content you share. I mean, I'm not always in the position to hire for those roles specifically, but as somebody who sits in one of those seats, I think it's also really important for me to hear and kind of consume what you're sharing out there. So for anybody who's interested, please go follow Amy, because lots of great, fantastic content out there.
Thank you.
Now, Amy, hold on, because while I love this career for you, and congratulations on 10 years, by the way, because that is a massive, massive milestone. I feel like so many people who go out and start their own companies, maybe make it a year, maybe make it 2 years. 10 years is huge. But I have to assume that little baby Amy didn't always want to grow up to be the CEO and founder of Avenue Talent Partners. So what did you want to be, or what did you think you would be when you grew up?
One really obvious thing, and then one not so obvious thing, as I was having a midlife crisis trying to figure out what I wanted to be as I was growing up. So, they are no longer here, sadly. I had a very, very, very special relationship with my grandparents. And my parents got divorced when I was young, and that was a traumatic event in my life. And luckily, my grandparents lived 2.5 blocks away from us and sort of like swooped in and helped get us through a really hard time. And so what was interesting is my grandfather and I bonded over James Bond, Sean Connery, to be specific. And so I wanted to be the female version of James Bond. That was my jam. That's what I wanted to be. That's what I was fascinated by. And I studied criminal justice. And then I realized in the real world what that job actually was and what it would entail and what it took. And that I'd probably be the first person that would get killed off right away. And, I didn't want to die. And so it was like, well, yeah, so I'm not going to be James Bond. And fun fact, I had I had the same high school boyfriend going into college, and we broke up, and it broke my sweet little baby heart. And then I was in college, and I met this person that I thought was so interesting and so cool. He was a senior and I was a freshman, and I got my first tattoo with him, which is really stupid. I don't suggest getting a tattoo that way when you could care less about that tattoo and you're just trying to be cool. Don't do that. Anyway, I did that. And the moral of that story is so you can't really have tattoos if you want to be a spy, because those are giveaways of, who you really are.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I guess I didn't think about that. But yes, obvious. It's an unobvious point.
Mm-hmm. So that was the first aha moment of like, oh, well, I guess if I got captured and they were interrogating me and they saw that, they would know who I really was. So, okay, that strike one, and then all the other things. Right. So there we go. So, yeah, it was going to be James Bond, female version style.
I love that. So then how did we get from James Bond to where you are now? Because I mean, like, listen, I'm sure you could probably draw some parallels, maybe, because you've been doing it long enough. I'm sure you could if you had to.
You can, because when I think about, so I landed in sales, another thing that I never thought I would do. I never thought that I would own a search firm. And I should say, just for the record, we're entering into 10 years. It's been 9. So I don't want to take away from the celebration that's going to happen in October.
You're right. That was unfair of me to advance your anniversary date.
No, and I don't need the LinkedIn trolls coming at me being like, you're wrong. It's actually been 9 years. So,
because you know that they're waiting for something.
They're in the dark shadows. They're lurking and they're ready to pounce. Not on my watch today, people. Not on my watch. So, that being said, how does it all go together? So the cool thing about James Bond, regardless if it's Daniel Craig, regardless if it is Sean Connery or any of the Bonds that you may have seen or you like, I like almost all of them, but that's a different story for a different day. They have to be really curious. They have to figure out like what actually is going on here so that they can crack the code and figure out who the bad people are and then save the world. And so to save the world, you have to know how. You can't just come in and willy-nilly save the world. And so that was interesting to me. And then that became sort of the second thing. So I get out of college and I have no idea what I'm doing. And I have no idea what I want to do. And it's funny because I do Pilates, and I was in the Pilates studio last night. We were talking about how our 20s were so angst ridden. Like it was a really hard decade because it was like this constant experimentation of, I don't know what I want to be. This doesn't feel good. And I don't know what to do. And I grew up in my generation where it was like, shut up and figure it out. I don't want to hear about your problems. And so it felt very overwhelming and a lot. And so when I think about how the parallels came together, I started figuring out, so it's kind of like the same thing. I'm building a house right now. It's kind of like the same thing with my designer. I can tell you like that, I don't like it, but it's really hard for me to tell you how I visualize what I do like. And so I found that same thing happening at that moment in my life. Like I didn't know what I wanted to be. I didn't, and this dream is shattered and I felt like a loser. And so, I started thinking about what I didn't want to do. And then I started thinking about what I did like, though, not what I wanted to do, but what do I like? I like people. I've always liked people. And I've always been fascinated by like what makes somebody tick. And my husband does a deep eye roll all the time. He's like, dude, you do not need to put this person through the ringer. And I'm like, I'm not putting them through the ringer. I'm just genuinely curious. Like, I want to know what makes them tick. I want to know what's up. And all of a sudden I'm asking questions of like, so when you were, 5 years old, tell me about that. And he's like, you're not their therapist. Like,
I was just going to say therapy may have also been a solid career choice for you.
I would be a horrible therapist because people wouldn't do what I'd want them to do. And I'd be absolutely invested and there would be no boundary. I'd be like, why are you not doing this? Like, no, that would not, no therapy.
Okay, that's fair.
So, although we do tell our clients, like we are one part therapist because just by way of what we do, here we go. But that being said, all things considered, I remember all of this time that I'd spent with my grandparents. And I have absolutely been shamed for this on LinkedIn, and I really don't care because it's one of the best lessons that I learned. I grew up where there was an expectation that when you are at a table and you are dining out, children should be seen and they should not be heard. That does not mean I could not have a conversation. It meant that you would ask to be excused. It meant that you didn't interrupt. It meant those were lessons that I carry forward with me today that I am so grateful for. And one of the things that I learned to do was pay attention and listen. And I had no idea that when we were going out to eat, my grandfather was a pretty formidable badass of a businessman, and people knew him. And all these people would come around him, they'd talk, and I would just be listening. And then when I'd be at my grandparents' house, I'd always go into the closet of my grandmother and my aunt, and I would dress up in their clothes. And they were always like really sharp outfits, like the heels that matched the skirt, that matched the jacket. And then I would go down in my grandparents' living room, and there would be these big sort of like coffee table books, but some were business, some were art. And I would act like I was doing business. And then I remember going and visiting my grandfather in his office, and I loved it. I mean, I still to this day have an obsession with pens, like the way, and it just would be this thing. And so I realized I like people and I like business. What do I do with that? Well, there's so much to do there. Long story short, my very first job was a technical recruiter. At the time, they weren't called startups, they were called .coms. And the rest is history. And so I got into being a technical recruiter. I have no idea who that person is. I should have never done that role. That is nothing that I would ever do today. I don't get it. My brain does not compute that way. And that particular company, I joined in the 90s and late 90s. And then this thing called 9/11 happened. And right after that, there was a massive recession. And my company was not equipped to take that on. And I survived a bunch of layoffs. And the moral of the story of how I got into all this is the owner of the company, who I absolutely adored, sat me down and said, as you can tell, there's nothing to recruit for. And we don't want to lose you. And if you want to stay here, you're going to have to get into sales. And so I got into enterprise sales, selling services. And I sucked at it. I had no idea what I was doing. There was no training. There was no enable. There was nothing. It was just like sink or swim, whatever you could do. And it was too little, too late. And then I was there until the company wasn't there anymore. And I needed a job. It was a recession. I ended up getting a job with a company that I was not interested in whatsoever, in an industry that I thought was a super snooze fest. And the person that I interviewed with, he was wicked smart, and I really liked him, and I felt like I could learn from him, and he took a shot on me. And I remember them hiring me. I was a guinea pig, and all of the cards were stacked against me. I came into working with a person that actively was working against me, like all these things. And he and I just formed this bond, and he taught me so many things that I take with me today. And he made me a better human, a better seller, a better business person. And the rest is history. And I got into sales, and then it was always around people, HR tech, talent acquisition, solving people problems. And lo and behold, I found myself in startups, and I found myself working with very technical people that knew that they needed sales, didn't necessarily love sales, and the juxtaposition of that as you're building teams. I got into leadership way too early. I was horrible. I demoted myself. And I realized that the same things that made me really successful in my sales career, because I've sold over $100 million in revenue on my own, without partnerships, without marketing, without any of that, that also is what makes recruiting go really, really well. And so my husband had seen me go through this roller coaster ride of early stage startups. And I am the early sort of like V1, figure it out, build something, build an enterprise sales team. And then when it starts getting too big and too messy and too bureaucratic, that's not my jam, and I peace out. And he had seen me go through this. And it was usually after funding. And he was like, I'm sick of watching you go through this. I started my first company in 2008 with the gentleman that took the shot on me initially. That totally changed my career. 2008 was 2008. We had no idea that another recession would hit. We were self-funded and bootstrapped. And I had the heartbreaking conversation with him to say, I got to take a time out. That was like a very low point in my career. Luckily, Yahoo took me back. I had worked there before. So moral of the story, don't burn a bridge on the way out. You never know when you need that bridge again. And 2015 hit. My husband was like, you're going through this all over again. And for as much as you care and as hard as you work and the things that you do, how about you do it for yourself again? And the rest is history. And so that's how it all happened. Why did I do what I did? This is actually, I think, interesting. When he told me that, I was like, but I don't know what I want to do. So here I'm again feeling like I'm in my 20s. Like, I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. And I remember this thing had happened with the company that I was with that was really hard to go through. And for 3 nights, I couldn't sleep. And all I did, I felt like Forrest Gump, all I was doing was walking. Like, I just could not sleep. I was like this rando woman in the middle of the night walking around my neighborhood, like trying to just like process it all. And that's when my husband was like, time out. We got to figure this out. And he's a CPA. He has his own firm. And he was like, guess what I'm going to do for you? I'm like, what are you going to do for me? Like, love me, support me, hug me? He's like, all those things. But here's what I'm going to do for you. I'm going to incorporate you. I'm like, incorporate what? Say what? I don't even know what I want to do. And he's like, I don't care. Figure it out. You're going to get incorporated. Give me a name. I'm like, what? Avenue Talent Partners came out of me thinking through, well, that could be a lot of different things. I don't really know, but I want whatever it is that I do to be personal to me. So my name is Amy Elizabeth Volas, and AVE, those are my initials. So it's very personal to me without being about me. But I liked the juxtaposition between an avenue. It's a path. It's an intersection. There are decisions being made. One decision makes without having any business plan, without having any idea of what I was doing. I got incorporated and the rest is history. So that is the story of how it all came together. And the big takeaway was being in HR tech, being in the people business, being in sales in those places, and hearing people struggle with hiring, not just hiring, but then keeping people was always something that turned me on. One of the worst things that happened in my career was getting recruited out by a snake oil executive recruiter. And I still get hit up by icky recruiting to this day, even though I own a firm. I don't know, it's weird. And I don't like what happens. I don't like the turnover. I have proven that it can be different. And so instead of whining about it, I decided to do something about it. And that is my jam. And that is my story, long drawn out, true Hollywood story. Amy Volas, there you go.
I love it. I love hearing, because obviously for as much as we've chatted now, I never heard that whole story. So it's so interesting to hear it go from like A to Z. Okay. Now let's double click into this, because I know that without a doubt, you've had to face some significant challenges and obstacles along the way. So help share some of those with me. Like, what were some of those big obstacles or challenges that you faced? And then how did you overcome them?
Oh my gosh, there are so many. I think one of the very first ones was being told that I was a guinea pig from the CEO of the company that didn't like me. And I knew he didn't like me. And quite frankly, I didn't really like him either. And I remember looking at the person that was my boss saying, how much time do I have with that individual? Like, how much are we going to interact? And he said, not very much. That's what I'm here for. And that, that was an important conversation to have. And while he was right, when he did intersect, it was like, so I ended up carrying 60% of the company's total revenue in my back pocket with what I was doing. And so you love me, but you hate me. And by the way, the feeling's mutual. I love what I'm doing, but I don't really love you either. So there's that. That was one of the biggest challenges of, here I am, and I fell into this role in an industry that I wasn't particularly excited about. I needed the job because it was a recession and jobs were not very prevalent at the time. And I had this shot. And so I chose to make the most of that shot. I chose to learn. I chose to be a sponge. And I chose to embed myself. And as a result, I fell in love with this industry, and it was really cool, and it turned me way on, and it was interesting work. All the while, the biggest challenge was having a CEO that wanted me, that felt like he needed me, but hated me being there. And that was really, really difficult. Very difficult.
So what were some of the things that you had to do for yourself in your day-to-day, right? Because you still have to show up every day and do this job in these circumstances. So how did you do that? The She's So Sweet podcast is brought to you by ClientSuccess. ClientSuccess is an all-in-one customer success platform to help post-sale implementation and success teams manage customers from new to renew. Through an industry-leading platform approach, ClientSuccess gives businesses an in-depth view into customer health, product usage trends, along with churn and risk data so that your team can not only retain customers, but help them grow as well. Whether it's managing customer onboarding workflows in shared portals, building custom health scores, tracking sentiment with NPS surveys, or doing more with less through AI and automations, ClientSuccess gives customer success professionals a true one-stop platform to manage all aspects of the customer journey. To learn more about the industry's fastest to implement customer success platform, visit www.clientsuccess.com. That's ClientSuccess. Simple, powerful customer success. So what were some of the things that you had to do for yourself in your day-to-day, right? Because you still have to show up every day and do this job in these circumstances. So how did you do that?
So I've shared this advice with many people. The better, and I don't know if I would suggest all of this today, because this can lead to burnout.
Is this fair?
The more I worked and the better I did, the more he left me alone. So that was one of the ways that I dealt with it, right? Excellence will always create opportunities. That's the advice, right? Be excellent at what you do and it'll always create an opportunity. Don't do it at your own expense though. So for example, I was doing really big multi-million-dollar deals with really big Fortune 50 companies, and I traveled a lot. And so the noise of him became almost like the Peanuts principle, where it was like, womp, 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 womp.
Yeah.
I'm on a plane. If I'm in an executive meeting trying to figure out what we're doing together, it became not that big of a deal for me. And I looked at it as noise. And it's not that I ignored him. It's not that I didn't communicate with him. It's that I made it so clear that I was so good at what I did that there really wasn't much that you had to question. I don't know if that was the best thing to do or the worst thing to do. And I haven't really, actually, Kristi, I haven't really thought about this in a long time. It's a question nobody's asked me before. I would have to kind of reflect further on what would I do differently, because I made a lot of mistakes in that too. Because you know what that also did is it made me real cocky. And then I was what people talk about, the definition of a brilliant jerk, because I knew he needed me more than I needed him. Because then guess what happened? No more recession, right? And
Right.
I know what I'm doing, and people know about that. And so I had lots of opportunities that I could consider. And when I decided to leave the company was when the person that I decided to work for, when he decided to leave. Because we had this defining moment of a conversation where I had all these ideas and this different opportunity. I remember going to dinner, and my boss spent time with me, helping me think about this dinner. It was just the CEO and I. And I remember approaching the dinner saying, you know, we haven't always had the easiest path. And I'm really excited about what I'm doing here, and I want to stay here. And the way that I see it is it's kind of like a partnership. We need each other to figure this out. And he stopped me, interrupted me, and said, this isn't a partnership at all. Let me remind you, you work for me. And as long as you continue to do what you're doing, you'll have a job here. I resigned within 2 weeks.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wow.
This is why I'm not naming any names. I'm not saying anything. No. People can't, I don't name and shame, but like, this is, you don't need to know who it is, because I'm sure they'll ask me. This always happens. Like, who are you talking about? It's like, it doesn't matter.
That's not the relevant part of this story.
Yeah. but yeah, that was a thing. And that was another moment where I was like Forrest Gump, walking around all over the place, talking to my husband, being like, this, I, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm not going to do this.
Now, I had to dig in there a little bit because I feel like I see a lot of folks and I hear from a lot of folks who are not happy in their work environments for a multitude of reasons, right? It could be a bad leadership. It could be toxic work culture, whatever the circumstances are. But I liked what you said about excellence creates opportunities. And I think that is something for people to just think about. Now, it doesn't need to be the same way that you approached it with overworking and burning yourself out, but there is something to be said about mastery, right? And I feel like not enough people focus on that and being excellent at the work that they do and becoming a master of their discipline and their practice, because that is ultimately what will find you those big opportunities in the future. So I'm going to make that as the big takeaway for me personally coming out of that story. But let's shift gears here, because yes, there have been a lot of obstacles and clearly you've overcome most. What are some of the successes? I feel like as women, sometimes we don't celebrate our successes enough, right? We accomplish something, we're on to the next thing, and we don't take the time to reflect back on the great work and the impacts that we've had and how we internalize those. So when you think about your career, what are some of your proudest moments?
Oh, I mean, same. Let's go back to the very first one. This particular company, I was in my mid-20s, super not excellent at a lot of things, but had mastered some things. And I got myself into a deal that I self-sourced. I created from nothing. And by the way, back at this point, it was all full cycle. And so for those of you that don't necessarily know what that means, I was my own SDR. I was my own researcher. I was my own account manager, customer success, like everything, all of it I had to do. Also, I was leading a team at the same time. So I will never forget, it was two companies that were in the Fortune 20 and they were merging and they couldn't talk to each other because of all sorts of government regulation. And so I was meeting with the COOs of both of these companies, and I was meeting with their consulting firms, their management consulting firms. And I put together over a $20 million over a $20 million deal, and it was done. And I did that. And that was amazing. And so that was like the first taste of like massive success, where I was like, oh yeah, this is great. Like the fruits of my labor are totally paying off. And it took me over 2 years to do that deal, and a lot of leverage of a lot of small deals, and a lot of planes, trains, and automobiles, and a lot of trial and error, and a lot of things that, while I could tell you about the deal and how great it was a grind to get there. And I think, going back to that excellence, creating opportunities, it's like, to get excellent, you have to be willing to do the stuff that nobody else wants to do. Because if I don't know how to do that, if I'm not willing to learn even anything about it, I don't understand the full picture. And I'm really grateful that I had that full cycle background. It makes me better at what I do today, so that when I'm vetting someone, I know exactly if they're telling me a BS story or not. So that certainly is one of the success moments. The other success, I've had 2 exits. One was an IPO, one was an acquisition, and building out enterprise sales teams within that is absolutely a proud moment, both proud moments. One of my greatest successes, where I think it's just like such a good way, I will end my career probably doing what I am doing now, is going out on a limb, no partner, no backing, and having my own company and doing it on my own terms, and knowing that what I'm doing is very different and it's not for everybody. And that probably makes me miss revenue opportunities. And I am A-okay with that, because I get to see how I'm making an impact, and I'm doing it on my terms because I know it's what's right and it works. And that every time, and it's not just me, I have my best friend in on this with me. She came in, yesterday was her 7-year anniversary. Somehow she lost her mind temporarily, and she agreed to my peer pressure to not just move 6 houses away from me. We've known each other since we were 18. We went to college together, but with reckless abandon come into this company and absolutely level it up. And we are involved in everything together. That was a pivotal moment of success. And knowing that we get to do this together, that we get to make this impact. And I was looking at all the comments about her yesterday. Like, that is my greatest success, is the outsized impact that this little baby company, because I don't have any desire to scale. I just want to do really good business. And I want to show people you can do really good business and still be wicked successful. And you don't have to have VC funding. And not that there's anything the matter with VC funding. I work with VCs all the time, but that doesn't mean that that's the be all and end all, or that's the success path. That you can be small but mighty, and you can create impact, and it can make a difference. And every time we make a hire, every time we work with a founder or CEO that raises their hand to get help and leans into that, that is a huge success that turns me way on every single time, let alone to do it with my best friend that feels the exact same way, that makes me better, and that we get to defy the odds of showing people that you actually can work with your best friend and do this really well. So those are my highlight moments.
Okay. So you made it so easy for me to segue to my next point here. So yesterday you did a great job of celebrating her and your partnership, and did so with like a beautiful, beautiful post. And I did get to read a lot of those comments as well. And so you're both very lucky to have each other. But one of the things that I love to talk about is how empowered women empower women. And you did that was a great example of it yesterday. I'd love to hear more about how you live that day to day, because you do give back to so many. I know you give back to me personally, and I have my own stories that I could share about how wonderful and amazing you are and uplifting, and I can go on and on. Tell me about how you kind of take that with you into your day to day, because there are so many folks out there, and I kind of shared with you my story behind starting this podcast, which is really about shining a light on women to celebrate them and their journeys and tell their story and give them a platform. And that's my way of empowering women. So how are you doing that?
It can, I just think about the golden rule. And I know that sounds super cheesy, but I don't want to not be in a room and have somebody say about me, she is a total sleaze bucket. And who she is online is absolutely who she is not behind the scenes. Like, here's the deal. Who I am in front of the scenes is absolutely who I am behind the scenes. And that's not for everybody. And that is A-okay. I'm direct. I'm going to tell you sometimes things that you don't want to hear, but wrapped in love. I call it peace and love with what you may need to hear. And I've got a lot to say, and I care, and I'll be in the ring with you, and I won't leave it. But all of that is wrapped in me thinking about how would I want to be treated? And if the roles were reversed, and they have been reversed, and when I was coming up through the ranks, and you've heard some of these stories, being told to shut up in a meeting with all men, or being told, as long as you're good at this, you'll stay here, or coming up, I've been around for 3 decades, and coming up through the ranks where it was like, I don't care how you feel. I don't care what you want. You're lucky to have a job. Just shut up and do it. Not that people were saying that, but that was like the overall sentiment, right? Coming up through that and having to figure it out on my own, and feeling alone and not always feeling supported, made it a lot harder of a road. And so when I see people that are struggling, or when somebody really cares, there's a difference between coming my way and asking me for help or advice. And it's very clear to me. It's like a one-way, icky, thinly veiled pitch of something I don't want. I'm not really interested in that. But what I am interested in is when somebody genuinely comes my way and I can tell they're at a crossroads, or I know that they're going to do something with this, or that they just need a little pick-me-up, or that they need to remember that they matter too. I am down for that reel, right? So like, I don't care about fluff. I don't care about BS. I don't care about the surface shiny object statements. I love the magic below the surface, even when it gets messy, because I'm messy too. We're all messy. And isn't it a beautiful moment when you can meet somebody where they are, when they need it the most, when they least expected it, and let them know that they've got this. It's okay. I see them. And sometimes it's when I least expect it. And I didn't know that I was even doing that. And it's just showing up in a moment with somebody to be there for them, to hear them, to give them permission, to remind them that they're worthy. And sometimes it's super intentional because I've taken the time to get to know somebody and they're showing up differently and that feels off to me. And so I want to find out what's going on. But it's also trying to be the person that I work really hard to be. I am not perfect. I make mistakes. I offend people sometimes. I have a big mouth. Sometimes that gets me in trouble. But I care fiercely. And when I make a mistake, because I do, we all do, I try to take accountability first, but I also try to learn from it and get better. And I want to show people that I am an imperfect being, that I am just doing the best that I can do, like we all are. And that I don't have to go to LinkedIn and pontificate about my W-2, my this, my that. I don't care, right? Because behind the scenes, I'm also a human that has a marriage, that has a life, that has stress, that has things. And I think sometimes we just want, I know we all want to be seen, heard, understood, valued, validated, and remembered. And helping people understand that they are remembered, that they matter, that they don't have to go it alone. It absolutely fuels my fire. And I mean, I can't do it for everybody. And that's why I share the content that I share and the way that I share it. But for the people that I can do it, or the moments that just organically happen, it's like the best. So it's not like this calculated thing where I wake up in the morning and it's like, how many LinkedIn comments am I going to make that makes somebody's day today? It's like, it's just organic. It's just sort of like, you know what? It's the right thing to do. Like I try to be a good person. When I die on my headstone, I don't want people to show up and be like, oh, I'm glad she's gone. She sucked. Like, I don't want to be that person. And so while I can have hard conversations and I can check somebody and I can easily put them in their place with my vicious rhetoric if I have to, at the end of the day, I don't want to do that, right? I can, but I don't want to. I've done that before and it doesn't really serve any of us well at the end. And what I realized is there's room for all of us, and abundance is a beautiful thing. Scarcity is not. And it's really cool to lend a helping hand and help somebody come up as I'm already up or I'm making my way up to. Sorry, I've got a little dry throat, but that's how I think about it. And so it's very easy for me to see Taryn and be like, oh my God, you've been in this with me for 7 years. We got through COVID together where I wasn't even sure if we could have a business. Nobody knew what was going to happen. And she stuck by my side. And you know what? We're in tech. In the last 2 years, it's been a magical mystery tour of crazy. And she's stuck by my side. And I hear every time I talk to one of our candidates, how much they love her, how much she's helped them, how much she's shown up for them. What kind of special kind of a-hole would I be if I did not scream from the mountains how much I appreciate her, how much she means to me, how excellent she is? And some people came to me and they were like, why would you do that? She's just going to get recruited out. That's the scarcity. I didn't even think about that. Like, okay, then that would mean that this is no longer serving her. You know, it wouldn't be a surprise because we have a commitment to communication. So it's like, I just think about like, it's the right thing, because if it were me, and it has been me, where anybody when I've needed the most has rallied around me, it has touched my soul. It has stayed with me. It has meant something. I mean, this Magnum bottle of champagne came from one of my customers with a card, and I didn't even know it was coming. They knew that I was struggling with this milestone birthday, and they went out of their way to celebrate with me when I least expected it. And I mean, that's like care you can't fake. Like that means something. So why wouldn't I want to compound that to put that out in the world? So that was a very long, again, these True Hollywood stories, Kristi, you got to
I mean, this is exactly why I invited you to be a guest though, because this is what I was looking for. And I wanted to hear the Amy story, and I get to hear it firsthand, and I get to hear it before anybody else. So for me, I feel like I'm cheating everybody because like I'm getting what nobody else has yet. Well, listen, Amy, I know that, listen, everything you've just said there is true. And for my listeners, like I'm going to share like a brief story here because I know we're going to get ready to wind up soon. Last month, so this is January, we're recording in January, in December, Amy and I were scheduled to have a chat. And so we had a meeting set up to have, we had a very specific agenda of what we were hoping to accomplish. And we both showed up to that call, and I had just had a very toxic exchange on social media, and I was not in a good headspace, and I was feeling sad and mad and just bad. And instead of us sticking to our agenda, Amy, you just completely used that time to give me the advice I needed to hear in that moment and lift me up and show deep care and love and friendship in a moment when I needed it the most. And so everything you just said, I'm like a true testament to you show up exactly as you described all the time, and you are authentically you. And there is nothing that anyone can say, oh, Amy's different behind the scenes. Cause I'm here to tell you that like, no, you are exactly who you say you are. And because of that and so much more, I'm just super grateful to have you in my circle. So if nobody believes what Amy is saying, I am here to say like, you live and breathe that. So I'm just super grateful for you. And I know that everybody who has the privilege of kind of being in your orbit would probably say the same.
Well, thank you. I mean, look, I think about that moment, and I feel like it would have been really icky to just be like, yeah, so we've got 30 minutes. We're here to talk about this, and visibly see you struggling. And if I'm really invested in having a relationship with you, which I am, those moments are the bonding moments, right? Where it's like, what's going on? And we had a very real conversation. And I will always remember that because you went on a limb to share with me something that was hard, right? It was unexpected. It hit you like a drive-by, and you were reconciling this and really like shaken by it. I can't fathom. Like, it's kind of like my husband and I driving down the road, and I see a turtle trying to cross the street. I'm like, stop the car. I'm jumping out. I'm getting the turtle. I'm helping it across the street. See something, say something, do something, right? Like, and that is certainly for the people in my life, especially when it is a concerted effort to spend time together, like we have done and continue to do. I don't know any other way. And I don't want to know any other way. And by the way, I care about this because it's important to me, not because I care about what other people think. And so I really celebrate what Mel Robbins is all about with the let them theory. If somebody doesn't like this podcast episode, let them. If somebody doesn't like my glasses, let them. Somebody doesn't like my shade of lipstick, okay, let them. And if somebody is not going to show up the way that I want, let them, and disconnect. And so we said this before we started recording, and I know what you're going to ask me. What would I leave somebody with? So I'm asking you.
Yeah, this is great. You get to ask the questions on the podcast. I really could just sit here and just like, okay, Amy, do your thing.
So now I'm taking over. I am the artist formerly known as Amy Volas, masquerading as Kristi. So here we go. But if I could share anything that I want people to understand, and it's a lesson that I've learned the hard way, is not everybody, not everything, not every place is meant for us. And the faster we understand what is the faster we can understand what is not. And I choose, and it is a choice, to be really well in tune with that. And that's the thing that I would leave all of you, is understand what that looks like so that you can disconnect from the people, the places, and the things that don't serve you, that aren't additive, where you can't be additive, that don't lift you up, that don't help you be your greatest good. And take that energy and bring it back to you so that you create space and hold space for the people, places, and things that are.
I mean, like, That was your mic drop moment. And listen, you already said this to me, so I'm hearing it for the second time, and it still has the same impact on me the second time around hearing this, Amy. But I can't think of a better way to wrap up our episode today. So I just want to thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story and sharing your experiences and your advice with our listeners. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. For anybody that stuck through this conversation with us, thank you for being on the magical mystery tour that is Amy Volas' story. I appreciate it. And Kristi, thank you. I loved this. I knew I would. I appreciate the invite, and I'm just tickled to be here. So thank you. Truly. Thank you.
So grateful for that. And so for those of you listening, if you enjoyed our episode, please rate, follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, subscribe on YouTube, connect with me on LinkedIn. And until next time, we'll see you soon. Hi guys, I want to share a bit about an organization that I support called Wednesday Women. They're on a mission to increase the visibility of executive women leaders that you should know, learn from, and be inspired by. On LinkedIn, they share the profile of 2 amazing women each week, on Wednesdays of course. And now just imagine if we all followed, amplified, and nominated the women that we want to see more of. Their initiative provides examples of women CEOs, founders, sales executives, technical leaders, and so many more. By supporting Wednesday Women, you'll see more of these professionals in your social feeds, of course, but also on stages, podcasts, and panels. If you're interested in learning more and supporting their initiative, head over to www.wednesdaywomen.org or follow them on LinkedIn.